Hi, welcome to Get Used to It. I'm Sheila Kuehl, your host, and this is our first show of the Millennium, or if it's a rerun, it's not. But it was. And so I have a very special treat for you, and actually a special treat for me. I've invited three of the smartest people I know, longtime activists, each of them a star in their own right, to get together for this show and talk about the 20th century and the 21st century. And if that's not a small enough topic, I don't know what is. I want you to meet my guests today. First, Torie Osborn, who, as I said, is a longtime activist, an author, designer of many of the most brilliant moves in our movement, I think, in the 20th century, and is now the executive director of the Liberty Hill Foundation. Welcome, Torie.
Glad to be here.
I hope that's not too much praise, but you know, I think you're the best thing since anything.
I dedicated my book to you for a reason.
Right, thanks. Phill Wilson, who was the co-founder of the Black, Gay, and Lesbian Leadership Forum, and is now, and I'm going to read this from his card, the executive director of the African American AIDS Policy and Training Institute at the University of Southern California. Welcome, Phill. Happy to have you here.
It's good to be here.
And finally, I guess we say last but not least ever, Michael Kearns, wonderful actor, performer, writer, teacher, daddy, and I guess entrepreneur, since you also sell your classes, so you're going to fill all the categories. So welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Sheila.
So I think probably the way we have to start these shows, it's obligatory, is to talk a little bit about the 20th century, I suppose as though it were more than a week ago. This gay and lesbian, bisexual, transgender movement really started, came into its own, gained attention, whatever we might say, in the 20th century. It was unheard of before then. And Torie, let me start with you. What did you like best about what we did as a movement? What were some of our missteps? Do you feel optimistic or pessimistic about the future, good or bad about the past? Anywhere you want to start.
Oh, and all in 6 minutes.
Right.
Well, I'm completely optimistic about the future. I think the most important thing about the past is that we're here. You know, we're here, we're queer, we're fabulous, get used to it. We have catalyzed a whole new conversation for the world, I think, about family, about democracy, about diversity, about the personal is political. And that's the bigger piece, or that's a bigger piece than just the sheer courage and accomplishment of bringing a new movement into existence in the last 30 years. And I think it's safe to say that, you know, we have sort of 30 years under our belt. Our visibility is here. Not that we don't take steps backward, and not that there aren't challenges, but the foundation is laid. And now the question is kind of, you know, where do we go as a community or communities and as a movement? And for me, the more interesting question is, where do we go as communities vis-a-vis the broader world and the challenges of which I think are immense, of a world facing, you know, large-scale inequities between rich and poor, and sort of global questions of vision and policy, and that's, to me, the question. Is sort of what's the gay movement or gay communities or gay contributions to the next millennium's key social issues?
But like all the movements, we kind of started out on our own. I mean, nobody was in our corner but us to start with. What do you think we did that was just great in the last century?
I think we built, forged really new definitions of family. You know, we're ostracized by our families of origin for the most part, less as time goes on, but we certainly have been. So having to create emotional support systems, I mean, nobody does community building like queers do community building. I think the network of sort of 10,000 spiritual and political and social groups, you know, ranging from the United Lesbians of African Heritage to the gay and lesbian choruses to the, I mean, it's quite extraordinary what we've done in terms of building alternative organizations that support us in different ways. So I think the the track record of building a foundation of community groups and having community organizing, building institutions and networks, some loose and some more kind of institutional, for the whole set of service and political and spiritual needs is a real contribution, both in terms of the skill set, the kind of entrepreneurial skill set that it encourages. So that's a big contribution, just putting the issue on the agenda. I mean, I always say I think that God has a tremendous sense of irony. God, if she exists, has a tremendous sense of irony that at this country's most conservative era in history, the last 30 years, the radical right wing has had more power and more influence than at any other time in American history, that the gay movement would come into being and come into power at the very time that the right has.
What do you think it was? I mean, we're looking mostly, I guess, at America, although I know we're aware of how this has really happened in various other places around the world. What was it about this last century that allowed this to happen? I mean, why in the 20th century? Why not the 19th? Or why didn't it have to wait till the 21st?
Well, there's lots of historical work that John D'Amelio and others have done about kind of the rise of capitalism and urbanism to create certain economic and really cultural preconditions that urban subcultures have come into being, not just in this country, by the way, in other countries, but in terms of economic and social and political historical reasons. There are reasons why sort of post-World War II, you have a critical mass of people in urban areas where you separated from their families of origins, off the farm into the cities, or in the military, actually, the Second World War, that you kind of create the material conditions for some kind of identity, development of identity. And then, of course, in this country, you have the contradictions of a country founded on sort of revolutionary notions of democracy and slavery and sexism and genocide. So I think what this country's historic trajectory is how it deals with the paradoxes of having the most idealistic, humane visions coupled with such incredible oppression and a history of such exploitation. And so this country's sort of karma is to kind of figure all those things out. And we're part of that. Other movements have come before us. We are not the last movement. I mean, I must say sometimes the arrogance even of many people in the gay community, because when you struggle with the closet, it feels so intense and so big. When you finally come out of the closet and start to be your best self, it's like, okay guys, that's true and that's big and that's brave and it's wonderful, but there are other social movements that have struggled for political space or identity, space before us. We're not the first, we aren't the last. And so I think there's that piece too, about linking up with other, that we stand on the shoulders of other movements, other communities, and have debt to other visions in terms of going forward.
Well, Phill, you sort of epitomized straddling two movements and the problems inherent really in both of them. I think when people think about the 20th century, they're absolutely going to think about the civil rights movement, which still belongs totally to African American community as far as I can tell. And we've emulated to a great extent, but differentiated as well. I don't want to limit you to just talking about that, but what did we do right in the 20th century, and why was it a good time, if it was, for us? Or not?
Well, I think that, as Torie pointed out, one of the things that we did right is that we're here. And there are people who are not alone, that at the beginning of this century were very much alone. And there are young people who wake up every day and they don't have the isolation that almost every gay or lesbian person had 30 years ago. Because you not only went through the sense of being different, but you went through this panic that you were the only one. And I'm sure young people continue to feel that they're different. I mean, I have two presumably heterosexual teenagers, and they feel like they're different. So I think that certainly gay and lesbian teenagers continue to feel that, but at least for a large percentage of them, they don't feel alone. So I think that has been a very, very good thing. I think that the world is different today than it was 100 years ago, in large parts due to our presence, in that we kind of bring to the environs, if you will, a different way to look at life and love and living. And I think that's important. I think that's healthy, not only for gay and lesbian folks, but all folks. And I think that is a very, that's a very, very good thing. I think that one of the things that I find most disturbing is that for a great number of us, we're still stuck in the identity politics. And that is some ways troubling, and particularly as I kind of look at my own life and the way I move through this process of living. And the truth of the matter is that the power of the success of our movement, I think, happens out of us not being stuck in the work of doing that. And the more that we're stuck with the work of being gay or lesbian or bisexual or transgender or the alphabet or whatever, and we can go there too, but the more we're stuck there, I think that we're limited from doing great work. And I think that there's still too many of us who are unable to reach our potential, not because of oppression or discrimination based on sexual orientation, but because we ourselves put those limitations because we're stuck in the notion of being. And where in lots of environments, no one cares. When I go into my kids' high school to talk about math, or I sit in a reading class, or I meet with one of the kids' tutors, we don't have discussions about whether or not I'm gay or not. We have a discussion about whether or not Corey or Winfred can do algebra. And that's important. I think that that's kind of some of the work that we have left to do.
Mm-hmm. Still, though, it feels to me sometimes, and maybe because I feel optimistic as well, not just about the future, but a little bit maybe accepting about the past. There's sort of a natural progression where in order to have a movement, somebody's got to identify a little more vocally there's a problem. And almost always it's the people who have the problem.
Absolutely.
And we did suffer from discrimination, and there was silence. And there was invisibility, enforced invisibility. So at the beginning, it was just us, really.
Absolutely.
And it kind of had to be, or has to be. And we form these little enclaves so that we won't be alone. But we also don't want to hear from people that aren't like us for a while.
Right.
And you're right, it does, in a way, generate the notion of identity politics. But it always felt to me like discrimination identifies the difference that makes a difference. And then we have to say, okay, now we're going to talk about it, or we're going to, we'll courageously do something. Don't you think it was a natural?
You're absolutely right. And part of, I think, the power of what we've done is we've understood that process. And I think that that's really magical, because it is a process, and it's a necessary process, and we got that. I think that sometimes we've forgotten that it's a process, that it's not the goal. And I think that, and I'm extremely optimistic, and I think that we have real reason to celebrate. We've built institutions in the face of tremendous obstacles. Now, we've made changes, particularly in the areas of health care and the notion of the right of health care that benefits the planet. That would not have happened if not for our labor, and if not for the tragedies that have befell upon us, and if not, quite frankly, is done on the deathbeds of our loved ones. And we built those institutions, and we address we continue to address the issues of health disparities for all folks, and we should be very, very proud of that.
What do you think we screwed up, if anything?
Well, it really has to do with understanding history. I think that we miss that sometimes, the whole notion that what we've accomplished has been done on the shoulder. We do stand on the shoulders of other folks. Acknowledging that we began alone, but we didn't end the century alone, and where we have come, we've come with the assistance of other folks. Understanding that what we are a part of, one of the things that I talk about is that what are we fighting for? What is this about? is this movement limited to the right to of individual private intimacy? Or is that a critical part of what we're doing? And if it is a critical part of what we're doing, what are our obligations to do the rest of it? I think that as gay and lesbian people, we have an obligation to deal with the issues of the environment and of education and of children and all of that kind of stuff, because we share this planet. And when you fight for equality, part of that has to be a fight for taking responsibility for all of it.
Mm-hmm. Michael, one of the things that was sort of an issue in this century, in America at least, and I think in other countries, were the arts and who would own them, and how free they would be or not. And certainly people in our community were kind of smack dab in the middle of some of those fights. If you want to defund any of the federal programs, it was because there was too much queer energy in them. And yet you chose to, in essence, talk about make the personal political, was make the personal into art, so that people would see it, would experience it. What do you think was sort of essential in this last century in those areas, and sort of the spiritual, the arts?
Well, it's
whatever.
so interesting. I'd like to think that all of these people who died didn't die in vain. So in some way, the influence of AIDS and HIV just cannot be denied on the artistic community and on all communities. And I think that that tragedy somehow has been certainly the force of my life, but I also think that it has been one of the forces of our consciousness. And back to just for briefly, I mean, I think that obviously Phill and Torie said brilliant things that I agree with totally, but I also I don't want to get too optimistic because I don't want to lose my edge, and I don't want to lose my anger, and I don't want to lose those things that continue to fuel me. On the other hand, if we look at ourselves as 30 years old, this movement, I think that a 30-year-old is just getting over, most of us, in our maturity level, the issue of self-involvement and self-indulgence, and looking at ourselves and staring at ourselves in the mirror and thinking, what's wrong with me and what can I do about myself? After 30, I think maybe, here's where I think that the hope really lies, is that after 30, I think you start growing up and you start thinking, what about the guy next door? And what about the woman down the street? And what about poor people? And what about black people? And what about homeless people? And what about people in other countries? And what? So I think that in some way we're right where we should be. Exactly where we should be. Back to the art situation, I think that one of the things of the last century which saddens me is that so many artists who were gay and lesbian went to their grave closeted and were unable to really fully express who they were, or were unable to be appreciated as greatly as they should have been. And I look at today, yet today we still have people on national television, daytime and nighttime, who are closeted. And so we've made incredible progress. And again, I think that AIDS had a lot to do with that. I mean, I think that the art surrounding AIDS and the issue of people being forced out of the closet because of AIDS brought a lot of people into an area of consciousness that they had not been in before.
Well, it's interesting that sometimes when we are engaged in a very serious or heavy matter, and we try to make sense of it,
Absolutely.
we try to make art of it. I mean, we write books about it, we do plays about it, and in a way, part of growing up is facing death, not only your own, but other people's, and it brings you into a place. I don't know, we've talked a little about spirituality, but it felt to me like the whole movement
was forced.
Suddenly had to do this softening, this exploration, this we're going to be by deathbeds. I don't know. I mean, I don't know any better than you, but it just felt like it changed us so
Absolutely,
much.
I think it did. I mean, I think that one of the most profound things is just the relationship between gay men and lesbians. I mean, I really think that happened as a result of AIDS. I think that these men, myself included, had to realize that we were dependent upon women who were nurses, women who were our friends, women who were sisters, mothers. We could no longer separate the idea of sex, the issue of sexism that we'd been so entrenched in all our lives. And the same thing, I mean, AIDS to me has been the greatest catalyst. I'm just talking personally, and I think that I speak for a lot of people. I mean, it's just been a catalyst for me to look at all other issues, not just homophobia. And as Phill and Torie said, that all these issues are linked, and that all these issues are equally our responsibility. And to get out of the myopic state of just looking at ourselves and our own identity and our own, you know, we're responsible for something much greater than ourselves and West Hollywood and our whiteness or our gayness or our height or whatever.
Just to stay with the arts for just a minute, but I was thinking when the two of you were talking about why this happened in the 20th century, doesn't it also have something to do with the fact that we can learn about each other? I mean, we have, I was thinking about my grandmother at the turn of the last century. Her New Year's Eve party, they entertained each other. They played the piano, they sang a song, one of them danced, my grandmother recited a poem. And I think, I want to say that's because they didn't have television, they didn't have radio, but watching New Year's around the world.
It's fantastic.
Live, you know, from Tonga and everywhere. And I thought there's a way that we're connected whether we want to be or not. We know each other through these as well. Is this another way in which, I mean, the arts are a very important part of that, not just news. But is this another way that this happened in this century because we could find each other? I mean, your performance, for instance, is known more broadly, I think, than it would have been.
Absolutely. And I think that performances in the future will even be greater. I mean, the technology that's available now allows us to connect in a much more immediate and intimate way more quickly. And I think that that's all good. I mean, it's a little overwhelming to me at times how quickly, but you know, it's what David Burnett talked about the night that he got his award. I mean, the fact that this ability for us to communicate and how to make us a part of a larger community, that where we're interconnected. I mean, that's what the internet is, for instance, and that to me is so exciting. That
and to do it in a way that is not as risky, and also to understand the possibilities, because with understanding the possibilities comes an expectation of happiness. Now that if I see how big the world is, it doesn't feel to be so much, it doesn't seem to me to be so much to expect that I could be happy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, I was struck by the similarity in my own experience and the women I was sitting with on New Year's Eve watching ABC, watching the positive power of television. So often all we see is violence and conflict on television, which can have a positive catalyzing effect, but the global interconnectedness that the world experienced that day, that I think opened up a lot. I mean, you've heard pundits say it, but I really felt the positive power of the internet, not just the internet, but of television and of the global world that we live in, the smallness of the world, the diversity of the world. In this very weird way, when you said this thing about kind of death and spirituality, my own experience of going through the AIDS epidemic, and women friends dying as well in middle age of cancer and so forth, but of the breaking down of, you know, the way the heart opens up, the way what spiritual energy is. Everybody has their own definition of it, of course, but that there is this way in which the struggle, the human struggle, at this moment in time is about that connectedness, is about whether you talk about it in terms of the allocation of resources. 1 billion of the 3 billion people in the world are going hungry. For the first time in history, they don't need to. I mean, we're in a post-scarcity. I believe, call me a cockeyed optimist, I've been a Pollyanna all my life, and that isn't changing with this millennium, but I really think that what happens with the internet and what happens with ABC showing, I happen to watch ABC, the world being shown on television, this global diversity coming alive in such a vibrant and hopeful way. I mean, it was mesmerizing to watch the dancers at Mandela's prison place and him lighting a candle. And I think there were millions and millions of people who felt that moment the way that we did. So it's the very same, it's as if the next phase of our movement, of other movements, has to be about that connectedness and about that responsibility to each other, and that we have nothing less, we have the possibility for the first time in human history of actually having this kind of, you know, more utopian or idealistic global movement. We have the possibility of democracy. We have the possibility of everybody having food, clothing, shelter. We don't right now have any of the mechanisms for making that happen. We really don't. But the consciousness is the first thing. And I just feel like that, I know that gays and lesbians and our visions and our understanding of some of these things from the fire of our own experience will play a leadership role in all of that. I don't know what it's all going to look like. I don't think we have any clear visions about it, but it does feel as if the possibility is there. I feel, I have to tell you, for the first time in about 25 years, I feel this tremendous sense of, it's not political, it's too small a word. It's like social, political, spiritual, artistic, human possibility opening up in a whole new way. And, you know, and I think it's a lot because of what we've been through, what we've done, the work we've done personally, the political work, these institutions, the self-examination, and the deaths, and the sense of, you know, our friends are not going to die in vain. All of it coming together.
We've also got a metaphor in our own lives for being more full or actualized, because for us there's a demarcation point in the closet, out of the closet, and at the moment we're out of the closet, practically everybody in our community says, I feel so much better, I'm so much freer, I can be totally myself. The rest of humanity may or may not have such a demarcation point. But so in a way, what you're talking about, we've been able to experience a moment or a year or, you know, a real difference in feeling more ourselves. It's being set free in a funny way, even though it's recognizing that we've been oppressed.
Right. The image of a closet door opening is very powerful. It's opening onto landscapes unthought of.
Right.
It's a blessing, as painful as it might be, as arduous as that process might be. And I'm not suggesting that it isn't still an arduous process for many people. But the landscape that the vistas that it opens to are so thrilling.
Well, and it's the power of telling the truth. I mean, I was thinking about the 20th century in America, and you know, the women's movement was about telling the truth.
Absolutely.
That civil rights movement, all civil rights movements have been about saying, this is what has happened to us, it's got to stop. And maybe that's
the next step. It's
Say
like
more.
global truth-telling and get it. Seriously,
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And furthermore, you know, I mean, it's going to have to be global. I mean, that's what I've sort of realized in the last few years is it's not just about, I mean, it's just what we've all been saying. It's not just about this movement. It's going to have to be, it's reached a point where it's going to have to be some global responsibility taking for creating some change, some real democracy and some real...
And it's happening, actually.
And it's happening.
On a whole host of levels, and gay and lesbian folks around the globe are experiencing the power of who they are. You know, whether we're talking about in South Africa, in Johannesburg, or in Cape Town, where there's a growing gay and lesbian movement, or in Zimbabwe, or in India, where similar things are happening, where folks are kind of coming to it and understanding the responsibility that comes with the privilege of being able to be who you are. And in cultures where the issue of not being able to be who you are, totally separate from the issue around sexuality. In oppressive cultures where people are beginning to say, this is who I am, whether we're talking about Moscow or St. Petersburg, or we're talking about Warsaw, or any of those places where they're now beginning to be growing gay and lesbian movements now. And these people are coming out, not coming out to spend as much time as we did to kind of look at ourselves, but coming out and saying, at the day they open the door, says, well, how can I change this world? And that is a very, very exciting. And I think that it's a tribute to a lot of the work that has been done in this past century.
But organized religion has really tried to separate sexuality from spirituality and really compartmentalize and control it. And I think that there is something inherently different with us and our kind of freedom, which everyone tries to sort of put down. Sexuality, they're just about who they sleep with, and make it sound like it's a very small, insignificant thing. But I've always had a hunch that because organized religion always has tried to control sexuality, not just about this gender stuff, but whether you only have sex in order to have children, you know, whatever, there must be something very powerful. And maybe that's part of the freedom that we feel when we come out of the closet, is to say, you know, okay.
Well, there's God in lesbian sex, I can tell you that. but I think the real thing is that it's about love. I mean, sexual energy is very positive, and I think one of our gifts, one of the gay movement's gifts to the broader world, is to not be so sex-phobic, you know? It's like a wonderful thing. Embrace it. Don't be afraid of it. There's God in sexuality. But I do think the deeper piece is that it really, and for us as well, for our movement as well, is to realize that it's about intimacy and about love and about connectedness. And that's what they're all afraid of, because love is tremendously powerful. I built a tree house for Bonnie Hagenbach when I was 9 years old. I was clueless how to build a tree house. I knew how to climb trees. I did it out of love. I found new places in myself because I loved her so much. The power of love, whether it's one-on-one, is tremendous. And you open people's hearts, and the power of human will, when it's linked up with other people, there ain't nothing that can stop that power. And churches have known that, repressive governments have known that, and positive movements, Gandhi, King. I mean, the most powerful social movements are not ones built on rage, they're built on love. And this sort of collective power of social action is one that comes from love. Real love, you know, that you feel. That's what they're afraid of. That's what people control and have tried to control, what sort of repressive institutions have controlled. And I think that's a piece of what we also have to give, our brand of love. So sexual freedom, yes, but it's really something that unites us with other people. And that's the heart, and you know, the power of heart energy, call it whatever you want. It's the power of love.
Well, the other thing that I think repressive, controlling religions fear from us is that we give the world the power of developing an individual relationship with God. Now, and that when you come out now as a gay or lesbian person, and traditional religious institutions say that you can't have a relationship with God, and you discover the lie in that, and you discover, yes, I can, now, and then I can develop that relationship between my God and myself. I can develop a personal relationship with my God. That's a scary thing. Because once I know that I can talk to the big guy myself, okay?
Or gal.
Right. And she listens to me, okay, without going through somebody else. Then I am powerful, I am free, now I can do whatever I want. And once I understand that at the end of the day, that I'm going to be judged on what I do. I'm not going to be judged on what you think I do. I'm not going to be judged on what the ministers say I should do. I'm going to be judged on what I do, okay? Then I begin to have the responsibility of my own action, and that's a very powerful thing. And all of a sudden, I can't be controlled. Now, and so that's one thing, that's one of the reasons why we are frightening to the religious right, but it's also one of the gifts that we give now to the rest of the world and to people who interact with us, because they discover it. Now, they discover that they can develop now an individual private relationship with their God now, and receive all the benefits and the power of that relationship.
And the fact that we have done this in the light of a sexually transmitted disease which has killed X number of people is quite amazing. The fact that we have not allowed that to deter our sexuality, our sensuality, our true feelings is quite an amazing thing. I mean, they had a lot of ammunition to use against us, and have and will continue to. And the fact that we have, in spite of that, managed to stand up for who we are and for the right of our own sexuality and our own relationship to a power higher than ourselves is such a stunning statement about gays and lesbians.
So I see you're optimistic. Look at this. The room is filled with optimism. So what do you see
then? The living energy, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, this is very exciting to me. Of course, this is very selfish to have the three of you on the show, because we never have the time to all get together just for dinner. So this is my selfish way of doing this. So here we are. You're optimistic. We've talked sort of about what we've done, what we are bringing into this new century. What do you think is going to happen for our community and or our community's interaction with others? I mean, what do you see us doing? Good question, I can tell.
Well, I mean, in a most basic sense, I think that the next, I mean, I called it coming home to America, but I think it's got to be a little bit less national chauvinistic. I mean, it has to be sort of a broader vision, but I think that being who we are in different spheres, I'm not going to say bigger, but in different spheres, in the schools that your kids go to, in the neighborhoods, just kind of quietly sometimes, not necessarily in a big old way, you know, not announcing it with a neon sign, but just being the best of who we are and not being closeted about our spirituality, our gayness, our whatever it is, the truth-telling piece. More and more of us being more out and being our best selves in more and broader arenas. Now, it could be the school, it could be the neighborhood, it could be on television, it could be whatever. I think that that's going to be very significant. For gays and lesbians to bring ourselves, our messages, and maybe even our discourse about individual expression and community responsibility, individual self-expression and community building, like David Burnett was mentioned. I think he's a great example. GeoCities represented individual self-expression and community building. Those came from his gayness, but they were a gift to millions of people. It goes beyond. So I think that those are the kinds of things that we're going to see more and more. I think that's significant. I also want to say that I don't think that it's just about our community. I mean, I really believe that whether you look at 20,000 species of plants and animals going extinct every year and global warming, whether you look at a disparity of wealth in this country that is worse than it's ever been in the history of this country, there are major schisms and challenges that exist. What I feel optimistic about is that the energy, the political space and the spiritual energy has finally been released, and but the potential is there to deal with them. That's something I've never felt in all of my 50 long years.
So are we talking leadership here? I mean, we haven't talked at all about the ways in which people who in our community who have come out have also started taking responsibility for other kinds of organizations. I mean, you're all very
your
good
leadership, Sheila, you know, over and over again what people say about Sheila Kuehl isn't that she's, you know, she's good for the sexual orientation. You know, she's a good example of a lesbian in electoral politics. They say you do the business of politics better and more differently, and your model of leadership, which is somewhat based in being a lesbian and in being a woman, it comes from your position from fighting against discrimination and oppression, but your bravery, you have a new model, you do it differently.
And that's the work of the 21st century for us. Now, that we do the work we do, now, not solely rooted in our sexual orientation, but from the lessons we've learned in that. Now, I guess the thing in my life that I cherish the most now at the moment is what I'm doing as a parent. You know, and certainly I am a black parent, and yes, I am a gay parent. You know, but at the end of the day, you know, the marker on whether or not I do that job well, you know, will be in the results of, you know, my two kids. You know, and the work I do there is informed by race and gender and sexual orientation, of course. You know, but it has to be, you know, really rooted in the notions of good parenting. You know, and you know, the work that you do that's happening with Torie. You know, that's happening. You know, being at Liberty Hill as opposed to, you know, being at the center. You know, being at the African American AIDS Policy and Training Institute as opposed to, I guess, being at the center.
It looks like a hotbed of leadership over at the center, right? Gestation, anyway. Well. Michael?
Totally. I mean, I feel that it's as revolutionary for me to drop Tia off at preschool as any gay and lesbian meeting I've ever attended. Just in the simple act of that. I'm integrating myself into a bigger world. I'm not hiding who I am. She's black, I'm white, I'm gay, she's adopted. I mean, there's a million social issues going on here, but like Phill said, it's really just the simplicity of this moment and integrating in this bigger world and saying, this is who I am, this is who we are, And these people are learning from it too.
You know, before I came here, I went for it. You know, my oldest, he goes, Uncle Phil, when are we having our family meeting? We have family meetings, and he said, no, we're gonna have a family meeting at dinner tonight. Now, another thing we do is we all have dinner together. And it was a passing comment, and it happens all the time. But maybe because I was coming to the show, it struck me now that there are a lot of folks out there who would challenge the notion that we could have a family meeting, you know, and yet in the face of the living, you know, it happens all the time.
But see, that's another aspect of truth-telling. I mean, one of the interesting things that's happened from our coming out, from our forming these chosen families, is that people have, in what other people call normal, and we often call dysfunctional, especially about our own families, have started to tell truth as well. Not just that they learn from the fact that we had to fight so hard to have a family that we're, by God, going to do it, you know, but also they start to tell their own truths. I mean, it was one of the interesting things that happened in families. We talked about this in some of the other shows. We would come out in our family, or to the world. That forces our family to come out, because now they've got a gay whatever the hell. And then, though, they sort of start to have the courage to tell the truth to each other about other stuff.
Incest,
because
abuse.
we've brought up
That's right.
truth.
Absolutely.
And I find the same thing from hearing from my friends happening in the schools, where we suddenly understand that there are not any normal families at all in the world. Normal, well, that everybody considers it. That there are single parent families, or well, these blended families. I mean, we are sort of modeling truth-telling where people used to hide it. I mean, my mother wouldn't allow us to write anything about my sister's divorce to any of our relatives in St. Louis. It was just terrible. Then I came out and my sister was okay again.
That's all she wants you to write about.
You know, it's so interesting. We live in the richest country in the history of the world, and there's more unhappiness in America today. There's high school obesity, there's mental illness, there's depression, there's so much unhappiness. And I think what I would say is that part of our process of coming out and building community and the kind of social purpose that we found, even through all the pain, I think we probably are all happier people, even though there's so many people we miss and there's sadness that we can't get away from, that we live with. But just even the honesty of facing that. And the reason that I say that is that I think there's a kind of a quality of life issue. There's a disconnect between the official political, you know, voter apathy is going up and up. There are less and less people engaged in the political system or in many of the institutions of society. There's a funny thing happening. There's a lack of faith in traditional structures, and yet bubbling under the surface, not just in the gay community, in other communities, there is beginning to be, and it feels to me a whole lot like the end of the 50s or the beginning of the 60s. I mean, if I'm going to give an analogy of some time during my lifetime, and I wasn't around in the 30s, which was kind of the previous generation but it feels as if there is just this bubbling, this kind of yearning for authenticity, for more fairness, damn it, you know, for less discrepancy between the rich and the poor, for getting beyond the boxes and the isms and the schisms, for this. It's sort of like after the riots in LA, where people just, like, they just went to South Central to clean up, you know, and there was just this outpouring of humanity and craving, yeah, naive perhaps, you know, but really coming from the right place. And that's what I'm seeing, that there is more and more out there. And in our own communities, I don't think there's social political vision, or there isn't a national political vision or social vision to kind of name it or capture it, but it's a born in a way that I haven't felt before.
And part of that for us now comes out of learning through AIDS a lot now, that you have to fight for your happiness. You know,
daily.
Right, you have to work on it. It's something that that you have to put energy in. Now, but one of the things that Torie said that has struck me recently is, you know, the case of the little Cuban boy in Miami right now. And with all the jingoism going on around that, and the issues around communism and nationalism and what have you, the thing that struck me, and maybe it's just I'm from another planet, but the thing that struck me, that it seems that most people get that yes, the issue around communism may be real. Yes, the issue around nationalism may be real. But at the end of the day, this is about a boy and his father. Okay, and I'm just amazed because and it's made me really optimistic because I'm shocked that we get there, because often I don't think we get those kind of things. That at the end of the day, after all of this little boy has a father, you know, and you wipe away all of that, and that's where that decision should be made.
That's right.
And I've really been moved by, even though they've shown the rioting in Miami and all that kind of stuff, and people understand the politics of that.
Right.
But even when even if they sympathize with the politics of that, they get it.
The polls were really clear on that. Anti-communism aside, the polls were clear.
Right.
Well, it's one of the most interesting things about my job, and I am an optimist, and I know the three of you, since you've been friends of mine a long time, know that, is that as jingoistic, as bombastic, as single issue as I get, or any of my colleagues get, or politics gets, there's some quiet, rational, common sense thing in the regular body politic that kind of rights the ship no matter what you're doing. And you know, and they have their own problems just like we do too. They'll hate somebody, I'll hate somebody, but I just get this sense when I go actually out in public. I have 425,000 constituents, and I don't see them all at every Starbucks where I have coffee, but just about. And there's just this sort of basic kind of common sense in a group of them where they tend to balance each other if there's a community meeting or whatever. And I think that that's what I see kind of when you were talking about the end of the 50s and the beginning of the 60s. There was this moment when all those women who had worked as welders in World War II were sent home because the men needed the jobs in the 50s. We built all of those suburbs so the women would be stuck out there and the men would drive to work. We were very depressed, uninvolved. My generation was thought to be a total waste of time. And then something started bubbling up. Now, John Kennedy helped. He started going around talking about how he thought the world should be. And that was the place where my generation in the late 50s and early 60s.
And I would say John Kennedy started making those speeches because there were some students in the South that started sitting down at lunch counters, ordinary people who just said no. And that eventually, and then that built a movement that then pushed him to the left. I don't think these things start with the Kennedys. I mean, we may have a difference here. I think they start with regular people. And I think where we are now is at the beginning of something. It isn't named. We don't have the Kennedys yet. Sheila, you might be one of the Kennedys, but for the most part, we really don't yet. And,
no, but you're absolutely right. That's where the courage is.
With the ordinary courage are, the people that have faced it and walked through the fire and are just saying no, just living their lives by example and doing it differently. And that touches people like nothing else. And that will create a new movement. I think we're on the edge of a new movement. I don't think it has a name. I don't even know what it is, but it's sort of like fairness and decency, the regular common sense and the belief in democracy for real. Not, and that will include some economic democracy, and it will include lots of things that aren't in the current political discourse. But I think it is that most people in this country, there's 30% that are right-wing schmucks, but most people in this country are not, the 25% that are probably lefties and liberals. They're in the middle, but they have good hearts and a good sense of decency. They don't want to discriminate against. They are not wittingly racist or sexist. They're working through their homophobia, and there is the potential of something changing in this country. But it's going to, it will come from people just saying no at the lunch counters, and then the Kennedys will articulate.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And the only reason I thought of John Kennedy is because it's his voice that woke me up when he came to speak at UCLA. But you're absolutely right. And I'm struck by the fact that one of the most popular, influential authors of the 20th century is Anne Frank, and that's exactly her vision.
That's right.
Think what she went through, her family went through, the Jewish community went through. I mean, the Holocaust. But her voice is about optimism. And she says, I think at the bottom, mostly people are good. And I mean, that's kind of what I'm hearing. And it's not Pollyannish, which has come to mean naive, although I think we may want to reclaim that word. We'll start a new movement.
I'll reclaim it.
movement.
I like that.
As Torie said, it is about people saying no, but it also has to be about people saying yes.
Yes.
Now, it has to be about people of goodwill now, saying, yes, I will do something. Now that I will step to the wall now and I will do something. Because that's how that change is going to happen.
Because it's it's ultimately from love.
That's right.
You know, I think we're going to see, I know we're probably nearing the end of the show, but the Seattle protests, I got to tell you, that felt like the beginning of something. Not just because it was kind of environmentalists and labor union folks, you know, vegan dykes and Teamsters arm in arm down the streets of Seattle. Whoa, there's a coalition.
And people in turtle suits.
Right, turtles and, you know, electricians and lesbians. But because I really do believe, I heard it on the radio, you know, like, what's the one thing that's the best idea of the 20th century? If there's one thing you think you have to take to the 21st century, and I forget who it was, but I agree with them. I think it's the sort of power and moral power of nonviolent protest. The citizen action, nonviolent citizen action. And I think we're going to be seeing more of it. I don't think it's going to be the guys that, you know, trashed Starbucks in Seattle, and I don't think it's going to be, and I don't think it's going to, you know, I don't think it's about violence. I think it's about the Gandhian king version of it. But I do think that the structures, the economic and political structures that shut people out, that are not appropriate, and some of them are our own movement organizations, not just gay movement, but other movement organizations that get too ossified or get too stuck to capture, to in any way match the new energies coming up, the new visions coming up. You just gotta have a little, you know, you just gotta kind of blow them up sometimes. And I don't mean in a violent way, but I mean there has to be nonviolent protest. And I think we're going to see more of it in the next 10 years, in our movement and beyond.
It's a good question. Is that what you would take with you into this?
Nonviolent civil disobedience. I think it's a really good idea. I think we're headed for more of it.
How about you guys? What would you take with you from the 20th century, which was only a week ago, into this?
Empathy. I mean, I think that I've told you this on this show and probably personally over and over, that I just think that the greatest lesson, which I learned from an acting teacher when I was an 8-year-old acting student, is to not look at people and say, how am I different from those people, but to look at people and say, how am I like that person? We have soul, we have heart, and nothing really separates us. This humanity, this bond can exist with any other human creature. So that's what I'd want to take, empathy.
It's funny too, Michael, because it feels to me like the technological extension of the arts, the fact that when you were talking about watching New Year's all around the world, or which was on PBS, was all arts, it was all dance, it was all music, it was all performance.
Which is
But that is one of the ways that I think we're bringing, if we discover empathy among ourselves, we bring it into the new century because we can see people we've never met.
Absolutely.
We can connect with people we wouldn't be able to find in a million years because, you know, they're in Sri Lanka. But we can communicate, we can see them. It reminds me of Woody Allen's movie, Radio Days, which was, there's a moment in the movie when everyone in the country is listening to whether that little girl is going to be rescued from the well. And it's the first time that the whole country is connected to the same issue at the same moment in time. And that's what happened to us as a world on January 31st, on December 31st. It was, we were connected because we were all focused on the same exact issue. There was only one thing going on.
And it felt great.
It did, it felt great. How about you, Phil? What would you bring into this century?
I would say individual action, the power of the individual. You know, I'm reminded of two quotes. One is from Martin Luther King, the other is from my dad. The King quote is, "No, everyone can be great because everyone can serve." And the quote from my dad is that I never look down at another person unless I'm reaching out to pick them up. And so the power of what we can do one person at a time is unbeatable.
You know, I was thinking when Torie was talking about Gandhi too, when Gandhi was asked what he thought of Western civilization, he said, "Oh, I think it would be a good idea."
Exactly.
Well, this has been wonderful, and I thank you all so much. Torie Osborn, Phill Wilson, Michael Kearns. Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed it as much as we did, because we certainly did enjoy ourselves. We're optimistic. The 21st century is here. We seem to have a very good feeling about it. and we hope you'll get used to it.